Dr. Johnson, we're ready when you are.
Okay, thank you. Is President Miller on?
She is. If you change your view to a speaker, you'll see that you are both pinned.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dr. C. Let me. Okay. I see. Okay. And are we both spotlighted? Yeah,
Yes,
okay.
you are.
Okay. Good morning, Dr. Miller.
Good morning.
I'm so delighted to see you. And without further ado, we're going to get started because our time with Dr. Miller this morning is only 30 minutes. We're just honored that she could be with us for any amount of time. Because as we all know, sitting presidents, college presidents, schedule is not light. So first of all, good morning to our esteemed colleagues who are joining us here at the third day and final day of the Social Equity Leadership Conference. It has been an amazing time, and today will no doubt continue in that trend, first starting with our esteemed colleague who I'm going to now introduce. I was going to sort of give a personal introduction for Dr. Miller, but I decided I better go with a professional one because she might get me later on. So let me start by first welcoming Dr. Miller to this space by way of background, and I'm going to ask that one of my co-chairs put her extensive background in the chat, please, so that folks can see it. This way I can provide just a brief set of remarks for her introduction and then give her the remaining time to speak. On July 1st, 2015, Dr. Fayneese S. Miller became the 20th president of Hamline University, located in Minnesota. She is the first African-American and second woman to hold the position. Prior to her appointment as president, Dr. Miller was the dean of the College of Education and Social Services and professor of leadership and developmental sciences at the University of Vermont. From 1985 to 2005, she was a professor of education at Brown University. And if I'm not mistaken, she was the first African-American person to be tenured in the psychology department at Brown. In addition to that, she served as director of the Center of Studies of Race and Ethnicity in America. And she was the founding chairman of Ethnic Studies. And of course, I have got to put in my own personal thing with Dr. Miller because she's someone I've known and loved for the last 20 years. And so I said, I'm not going to get emotional, but Dr. Miller means a lot to me. And I was the first she hired. So, Dr. Miller, please take it away. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. One of the better things I ever did when I was at the University of Vermont was to hire you. As Dr. Johnson said, he was the first hire I made as dean at the University of Vermont. And it was, I'd do it all over again if you let me.
That's right.
So good morning to all of you. I'm absolutely delighted to have been asked to speak to all of you. And I'm going to probably go some places that presidents often don't go, as I share with you some of my thoughts about the world in which we're living in today. So I have a few things on my mind that I want to talk about in regard to the purpose of higher education. Higher education institutions were founded on the notion of being a civic good, to provide educational opportunities for all, to create learned members of society ready and willing to do good in ways that benefit society. I believe that most of us, and probably most of you, still believe that that is who we all are about and what we need to be doing in higher education. However, I'm not so sure we're accomplishing that today. We've been tested as a higher ed sector. The public no longer sees us in the way in which we see ourselves. We prepared many. We prepared lawyers, doctors, I could go on. But is that enough? I don't think it is anymore. I think we need to go back to looking at whether or not we're preparing students to be members of a civil society and what it means to be a member of a civil society. What are we teaching them? How are we teaching them? What kinds of things are we encouraging them to do? At Hamline University, we believe that civility is really at the heart of who we need to be as a nation. So we crafted a civility statement several years ago. And that statement is really intended to allow complex conversations that need to occur, whether we want them to occur or not. But I want to go back before I get into any of our talk about civility, just to take us back to events that have occurred over the last few years. Starting, and we could probably start before then, with the election of President Barack Obama. When President Obama was elected, what did we all hear? We have now become a colorblind society. I think things over time, even during his leadership, prove that we have not, in fact, become a colorblind society. During his presidency, we had the killing of Philando Castile. And the murder of Philando Castile occurred about a mile away from my campus in Minnesota. Then we had the rise of Donald Trump. And I wouldn't even say his presidency led to his rise. We had his rise long before then. And the things that were sort of bubbling up in society, where there were people who thought that some people had things that they deserved and should have. Then we turned to some pivotal moments that we can also look at: the pandemic. But very shortly after the pandemic, here in Minnesota, we had the murder of George Floyd. And I think the world responded when we had the murder of George Floyd. And looking at what does it mean? What does social justice mean in this society? What does a life mean in this society? And because of that George Floyd very public murder, although if we go back to Philando Castile, I would argue that I thought then we would see some changes begin to occur in society. Because how could we not take a look at who we are when you had a man killed with a young baby in the back seat? George Floyd, we had someone kneel on his neck. We had to respond in very strong ways. And Hamline University has been in the thick of all of this, even though we're not in Minneapolis. We've been in the thick of a lot of stuff that's been going on in our nation. Philando Castile, George Floyd, Daunte Wright. And Daunte Wright's situation was really important also for Hamline University, because I tell you, many of the students at Hamline University marched, they protested. And when Daunte Wright was killed, you can imagine the Hamline University students were out there. And I had several students who were arrested and jailed for a whole weekend. And they were jailed, they were arrested because they had what was called riot gear. And I want to tell you what their riot gear was. Safety goggles. Safety goggles was the riot gear. So I ask, what kind of society are we becoming? Who are we, and what do we need to do in order to protect our democracy, in order to protect our voice? So when we talk about becoming this colorblind society, how far from the truth were those words? We as a nation actually became more focused on race during President Obama's time. Because as I said, there were some people who believed they were losing their place in society, a place they claimed based on skin color alone. So we've been tested in many different ways. I understand that what I say today is not politically correct for a university professor. But I think there are things that presidents must say. I think that as presidents, we've become so focused on our donors and making sure that we don't offend our donors, that we've somehow moved away from our role as universities and what we need to make sure that our students are capable of doing. They need to hear different sides of a position. When I was in graduate school, Jensen, You've all heard of Jensen, the one who thought that Blacks were less intelligent than whites, came to my graduate school. And I was the only Black person in my graduate program. And I decided that day that he needed to know that I was there. And I sat in the front row, front and center. And every time he spoke, he had to look at me. But the reason why I did that is that the only way in my mind that I could craft an argument that was in opposition to what he believed was to hear what he had to say. So if we continue to shut down oppositional speakers, what are we doing for our students? How are we preparing them for the world in which they're going to live, while not everyone is going to agree with what they say and how they say it? They need to know what's being said so they can challenge it and come up with thoughtful arguments against it. And in my opinion, that's the only way we can continue to move forward. Again, I know that everyone agrees with me on this point, but I think it's important that we not shelter our students and that we not hide them away or protect them when someone says something that's offensive. They need to know how to respond when something said is offensive. I want to share with you some words that the 11th president of Brown University made in a tongue-in-cheek way, and how he described the presidency. And I say this because I think that in some ways, it truly represents how some think of the presidency, and how in retrospect, we also think of our leadership in our universities. And this is what he said, and I quote, "A president is expected to speak virtually, continuously, and words that charm and never offend, to take bold positions with which no one will disagree, to consult everyone and follow all proffered advice, and do everything through committees, but with great speed and without error." Resonate with any of you? Yeah. Those words were spoken in the 1940s, and however ironic, the sentiment is not too different from what some expect of the president today and of professors today. While the president should always strive to be inclusive, listen to and represent the various voices on campus, at the end of the day, a president, our professors, our leaders must be willing to lead the institution and be held accountable for the decisions we make. We must be bold, but in being bold, we must allow dissent. Dissent is not always negative, but can and should be a critical component in structuring the kind of conversations we have on our campus, or should be having on our campuses all the time. And I ask these questions: do we not, at least in theory, even if our actions do not always align with what we say, believe in the basic tenets of civility? Do we not expect all of our community to engage in critical, meaningful, and thoughtful conversations that encourage us to be better than who we are now and who we want to be? Do we not want our students to be civic participants? I argue that a critical part of democracy is critical discourse, and it's also a major component of civility. For if we embrace the expectations some have of the president, and as described by Winston, higher education will lag behind and continue to react than be proactive in the face of the many challenges confronting us. Some think that we are no longer relevant, and I'm sure you know that. They question our ability to educate. They think we're too liberal. They think that we tell students what to think and what to do, rather than give them the tools to be critical thinkers. I would also say we all have our traditions in higher ed, but we can't let those traditions hold us back from what it is we need to do as a nation. As I was preparing what I wanted to say today, I was reminded of the words of Lucille Clifton, a learned and astute poet. And she said this, and I said this now at my commencements, at presidential installations where I've been the keynote speaker, because I think these words are very prophetic. And this is what she said: "In the bigger scheme of things, the universe is not asking us to do something. The universe is asking us to be something. And that's a whole different thing. She speaks of the universe. We speak of the communities in which we live and work, from which our students hail, families from which they come. Each of those entities expect us to ensure that our students can do and be something more than they were when they entered our doors. So if we are going to be the harbiters, or if we're going to be the voice of society to some extent, we need to make sure that our students know how to speak, know how to be. So I question you, my colleagues. Is it enough that we say that we're inclusive institutions? Is it enough that we talk about our demographics? And that is what's happening in higher ed a lot. We're talking about how many students of color do we have? How many BIPOC students do we have? We talk about whether or not we have an anti-racist statement. We talk about whether or not we have centers that are focused on social equity or race or all of those other kinds of things. But at the end of the day, what does that truly mean? How are we living out these symbols that we put out there, and then we pat ourselves on the back for saying we've done our job? But have we really done our job if our students aren't able to respond in the way in which they need to? If our students aren't able to confront the injustices that occur on a day-to-day basis in our society, if they don't have the voice that they need, and I think they need the voice. But I also think that our presidents, we are the leaders of these institutions. If we do not stand up, if we do not speak out, then shame on us for doing that. We must stand up, we must speak out. I will tell you as president, I do that all the time. And I say to my board of trustees, when you hired me, and Dr. Johnson will tell you, when you hired me, you knew that this is who I am. So if you're upset now because I'm challenging you, or I send out a letter before George Floyd's murderer is convicted, calling George Floyd's murder a murder, which it was, then that is what you gotta expect that from me, because I told you up front that that's who I am. And that's what I saw was a murder. I think it's our moral duty to make sure that we're creating a community of learners and scholars. And let me share a few thoughts with you on this topic. Arthur Brooks, a writer for The Atlantic, listed several steps that are important for a civil society. And he said, one is imagine a better future and detail what it makes to be, what it entails to do that. Envisioning yourself taking action and then taking action. So we can help by doing all those kinds of things. I understand how important it is to be in our offices and writing. Dr. Johnson and all of you had to do that in order to get promoted and tenured. But if you're going to write about something and not do something about what you write, you've contributed to the scholarly publications, but have you truly changed society? And I think that's a question we have to ask. Have you truly changed society with what you write? Because your writing is shared among you, but do we translate that writing into policy? Do we translate that writing in such a way that it has meaning? I think we need to do that. The other thing that I think that we need to do is that we need to make sure that our students who come to us understand what it means to be hopeful. This to me is a real problem today. Having hope for your future. At Hamline University, over close to 40% of our students are now BIPOC. 47% in this class were first generation. Many of them are coming from environments where education is a dream. And what does it mean to have that dream and have hope for their future? But they need to understand the difference between hope and optimism, freedom and liberty. Optimism is a noble ideal. Hope, however, requires us to fight to protect our liberty. Hope requires us to do something, as Lucille Clifton said. It requires us to be something. Several years ago, I gave a talk to the NAACP group in Rhode Island. And the topic of my talk was where have we been and where are we going? And in that address, I talked about freedom and liberty. And I will do so today because I think those are important because democracy is being threatened in our society. And freedom and liberty are two important tenets. We can all say that we have freedom, we have certain rights, but I would argue that our liberty is being challenged. And here is one of the ways in which our liberty is being challenged. In those states where the right to vote is being challenged based on what you look like, your income, and whether or not you're a student, that's a threat to our liberty. That's an existential threat to our liberty. So legally, we all have the right to participate. So we all know we have the right to vote, but our right to vote is being threatened, and that's a threat to our liberty. And we need to make sure that our students understand that that's a threat to our liberty. One of the things that happens here at Hamline University several years ago and recently, we've been designated as one of the top institutions among those in the US for the percentage of students who vote. So when I talk about civility, when I talk about liberty, when I talk about democracy, those are things that I think are basic tenets that should be a part of higher education. Because we want students to understand what it means to be a part of a civil society and to appreciate the different communities in which they will live and work. And they need to be ready for the various communities in which they live and work. James Madison once said, the university is our path to liberty. If that is the case, then we as scholars, we as educators, we as members of this learned community need to make sure that our students understand what the notion of liberty means and how they can begin to act on this notion of liberty. So I say to you, my colleagues, we have a moral responsibility to help our students realize the power and agency in protecting our democracy. January 6, 2020 was a shock to many of us when we saw people scaling the halls of liberty in order to fight for something that meant that others would be denied particular rights. We as institutions ought to be important to rebuilding this nation in the way in which it needs to be rebuilt and making sure that every citizen is viewed as just that, a citizen, as someone with rights and privileges that they've earned that have not been given to them. So I say that education still is the hallmark of what it is we would like it to be. But we have a lot of work to do if we're going to reclaim our place in society. And I think we need to reclaim our place in society. We have been silent too long. We've allowed too much to exist. We're no longer beloved the way in which we were. And if we're going to take it back, we need to start fighting for what we believe in and acting accordingly. I know I've gone on probably a little longer than I intended, but I just wanted to share with you some of the things that are on my mind, and democracy and preserving democracy and helping students understand the notion of liberty are two things that are very important to me. So I thank you.
Amazing. Dr. Miller, that was so fabulous. We're going to have Dr. Zawi, one of my co-chairs, to give a thank you, but I wonder if you have time to maybe just take one question from the audience.
Sure.
Okay. Dr. Zawi, if you want to field any questions that are there.
We don't have any questions yet. Lots of thank
There's a hand
yous.
up.
Oh, Dr. Harris, please.
Good morning, Dr. Miller.
Good morning.
This is not a question per se. I had the opportunity to co-edit with Dr. Johnson in 2010, the book, Women of Color in Leadership, Taking Their Rightful Place. You have definitely demonstrated to me, and I think to us as an audience this morning, that you are truly deserving of that title. And thank you so much for speaking truth to power. It is so refreshing. And it's
Thank
a
you.
pleasure to meet you finally. Thank you.
Yes, you too. Thank you.
Dr. Miller, Dr. Harris has been trying to meet you for years. I've been bragging about you for the last 20 years. And she's told me if she didn't do anything else today, she was coming to hear you.
Dr. Franklin?
Thank you. Good morning, Dr. Miller, and thank you so much. I've had the pleasure of working as an executive chief of staff with Dr. Lowry. So I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Cole and Dr. Simmons at Brown University in 2000 when I hosted the first conference for Black gay men on that campus. And I want to say that this speech this morning left me inspired, and the words "from whom much is given, much is required." And I see that you have completely exemplified that, not only in your action and in your deeds, but certainly what you have exercised today in your power as an office of presidency. I'm so inspired. I thank you so much for your leadership.
Thank you. I thank all of you for what you're doing. We've got we're in this for, I hope, for the right reasons. I think that we always have to look at how we make a difference. And I don't mean those words in the way in which they've been bandied about, but truly make a difference in the lives of our students, and therefore changing this nation in the way in which it needs to be changed. I think that for too long, we've, and no offense to those of you who are not Black and brown, but too long, we have not recognized what so many bring to the table, and therefore not showcase the power that's in all of us.
That's amazing.
Dr. Miller, you are an inspiration. Thank you for your words and for being with us here today. And I hope you can join us for the rest of the conference, because I think, like I have throughout this experience, you too will be instilled with hope. I don't want to take up too much time because I want to respect the next opening plenary, which is posted for you here with Representative Frederica Wilson. But I do want to say a few words because I think it's important. You asked us a number of questions. What kind of society are we becoming? Who we are and what we need to do in order to protect our democracy, in order to protect our voice. And I think that an initial answer to that is that I hope this conference demonstrates a first step in voicing who we are and what we need to do to protect our democracy and our voices in this movement of social equity, diversity, and inclusion to create the society that we envision. You asked another question, and that pertained to, is it enough that we say that we have inclusive institutions? Is it enough that we talk about our demographics and what's happening in higher education? And my initial response to that on behalf of my colleagues is we need to talk the talk. We need to walk the walk. We need to lead by example and prepare the next generation, holding one another accountable for doing the hard work of social equity to change society, as you noted. You also noted that we needed to instill hope in our students, and my desire, once again, is that this conference provides examples of how to do this because there is hope. We are here, and we will continue to fight to protect democracy, distinct voices, and liberties for all. And I'm going to leave it there. I'll give you the stage, Dr. Miller, for the last 30 seconds that we have for this particular session. And once again, thank you so much.
Well, I thank you for that summary. I appreciate that. And I know that all of you, by virtue of this conference, are trying to do what you know and what you believe is the right thing and for our students and for your colleagues, because while we can bring our students along, we have to look and say that our colleagues, some of them have a long way to go, and we got to help bring them along. We can no longer expect students of color to be the ones to share history when many of them don't know that history. So it's everyone's responsibility to learn that history and to teach it, and not see it as compartmentalized and only teaching it in race studies classes. It needs to be taught in every single class, even a math and science class. So I thank you for inviting me. I wish I could stay. Unfortunately, I have some other stuff to do, but I'm sure Dr. Johnson will make sure that I hear everything, and I'm sure, and I know you're recording it, so I hope
Yes.
to listen to the recording. So I thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr.